We're recording this in August of 2019, and I've just had at this table a very interesting conversation that worries me, and it should worry you too. Because if you've noticed here in Kenya, there are certain families that are going without meals. There are certain people who haven't had their salaries. Children aren't going to school. Counties are grinding to a halt. But really, most of what we know about this is surmised in 4 words: division of revenue bill. What does that even mean? What is the politics, the legality, and the solutions behind this current impasse between the national government, where represented by the president perhaps best says, we have only a limited amount of money, tosheka na ulicho nacho, and the county government that says that you have certain commitments? What really is behind it? And since when could we have a conversation without shouting at each other and really get to understand why it is we're in the situation in the first place? I hope you'll join me for this one. Kenya is in the early stages of devolution, one of the most revolutionary changes in its law and in practice and how the country is governed. And yet today, we're recording this right now in August 2019. There are people who are on the streets, doctors and different other people who are paid at county level. They don't have money. There's a debate between the national government, rather not even a debate, but an impasse between the national government and the counties on how much money should go to the counties. The division of revenue bill has become part of the public lexicon in a way that is not fully understood. What is it? Why does it impact you and I? And how do we get out of the impasse that we're currently in? And today, this conversation is really for me to be able to learn along with you what exactly the challenges are, where are we coming from. Around this table, I have 3 gentlemen who are in various ways really stuck into this conversation. And I'll start with the gentleman on my right, Kamotho Waiganjo, constitutional lawyer, one of note, and has been involved in this process in terms of making the legal instruments that have framed devolution. Abraham Rugo, who's with the International Budgetary Partnership, and he's also now, as has been described prior to this conversation, in the kitchen, trying to figure out what's going on with this. And a person who's also well known to Kenyans with regard to his views on the economy and on politics to a certain extent, economist David Ndii. Gentlemen, I started by saying that there's a lot of confusion with the division of revenue bill. And if you want to know where you're going, really, it's really important to look at where you've been, right? And I don't think that there's a very clear understanding of why it is that we are here. Kamotho, I want to start with you. What historically has led us to the point that we are at with such a deep division between national government and the counties on division of revenue?
Thanks. I think the place to start is to recognize why is it that Kenya decided to devolve, and why it was that in 2010, devolution was the most attractive component of the constitution. It is essentially because Kenya has been defined from independence as a country of inequity and exclusion. And most people recognize that when we have talked about inclusion in the past, we've talked about inclusion of political elites. Kenyans wanted something that would resolve the inclusion problem in a way that would benefit them as citizens.
Sort of bring them to the table.
Bring them to the table and enable them to have a right to national resources that was divorced from politics. Because remember the old days of Siasa Mbaya Maisha Mbaya. People wanted no connection between politics and the entitlement to national resources as citizens. So the design of the devolution instruments in the constitution was to ensure that every Kenyan from whatever part of the country was able to get an equitable share of the national resource. And
let me jump in there.
Yes.
And ask, when you were part of the teams that were drafting the laws on devolution, yes, what did you have in mind? What did you have in mind, and when you look at it today, what do you see?
What we wanted was to respect the principles of the Constitution. Because one of the challenges we found at the point at which we were involved in the process of implementation is that because the Constitution was a negotiated document, at some point some of the structures we created, some of the processes we created actually started to violate the principles that the Constitution had set. Yeah, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When the Senate had been created as a protector of devolution, the reason why the Senate had been created is to ensure that the National Assembly, which generally represents the interests of the national government, would have a counterbalancing weight by the Senate. So that was in the initial design of the Constitution. If you look at the Bomas draft, the harmonized draft, the revised harmonized draft, those drafts were very clear to ensure that you have a fairly powerful Senate when it comes to the issues devolution. When the draft went to Naivasha, the Senate was completely neutered. So what you ended up is you have a House which has a responsibility of protecting devolution, but the instrument, the statutory instruments are not there. So there's a disconnect between that House and the powers that it's supposed to have and the responsibilities that it has. So what happens is that it may desire to fight for the interests of counties, but it doesn't have the legal wherewithal to do it. So that disconnect, you can find it in that. You can find it in institutions like the CRA, where again you have a very strong institution in principle, but in terms of its functions and responsibilities, those were whittled down. And I think the problem then becomes there's a disconnect between constitutional principle and the architecture. And what we have done is to continue to even dilute that architecture further, either through law or through practice. And some of the problems we are finding now is a continued dilution of those processes and architectures to the detriment of devolution generally, not to the detriment of governance, because the conversations are money for governance. It is to the detriment of county governments, which are actually the places where the Kenyans are getting services from.
Okay, so if I'm a person in Lodwar, Lokicha, or any part of this country, and I'm listening to my senator telling me that we've actually proposed that with this division of revenue that you should get more, but it's the national government that is, the National Assembly, the national government that's fighting you, and I can do nothing about it. Am I, as that person, to say then, well, okay, fine, if you're not doing anything about it, then why don't you just get out of the way?
The truth of the matter is that my own view is that if either through constitutional amendment or through affirmations by the courts, because remember that the courts have continued to strengthen some of those institutions. They did that when they had the case with regard actually to the Division of Revenue Bill in 2013, when the National Assembly had actually said this bill, the Senate has no role in this bill. The court said, no. Our reading of the principles of the Constitution is that the Senate must have a role. If we don't continue strengthening the Senate, it will actually become an irrelevant institution, which would be detrimental to the interest of devolution and the citizens generally. So in a sense, as a country, we have to ask, this is not about senators. This is about whether we are getting the benefits of what the Constitution intended. Because don't forget, at the end of the day, if you look at the conversation about various contestations on the interest of counties, when it came to the question of functions, the functions are allocated by the Constitution. The National Assembly has continued to pass laws that take away those functions. But because they can override the Senate, even if the Senate is a protector of devolution, there's nothing it can do. The laws are going to be passed by the National Assembly and assented to. It's only in the courts that you go and challenge some of those laws. So that is what I'm talking about, a disconnect between the interest and the principles of the Constitution and the architecture that we have created, first in the Constitution, when we diluted some of those provisions, and then continually through law, and now, dangerously, through practice. Where now we have a process where the law even says the Division of Revenue Bill must be passed by a particular time. The government just doesn't. When the law, the Constitution says money must be released to counties regularly and without delay, the law says it must be released every month. The money is not released. By practice, nobody pays the price. So by practice now, we're weakening devolution further and further. And then complaining that it is not producing results.
And it's not working.
And
So
it is not working.
giving a dog a bad name.
A bad name so
essentially.
that you can finish it.
Now, David, let me come to you. The disconnect that Kamodo speaks of, right? So we have principles that in principle should serve all of us. Practice, they are not respected. We have the CRA, for instance, that doesn't have the power or the teeth to be able to follow through on some of the recommendations that it makes, the Senate as well. I don't want you to speak to what currently is, we're seeing, but rather to the thinking, the philosophy behind this having one powerful document in the Constitution that says something, but then, having essentially a watchman with a rungu defending against people with guns.
Thanks. Thanks, Alan. I think what I'll do is try and contextualize what Kamodo is explaining in politics. And, and history. I think because history is important, as you said. What are we struggling with, essentially? In Kenya, the government of Kenya was established as a colonial administration. So we call it colonial administration. So it is an administrative state. The colonials did not establish a political system for people to govern themselves. They established a system to administer the colony, so in which they could administer and manage us and control the Africans in the colony and exploit it and do all manner of things. So at independence, we wanted to establish a political system because people govern themselves through a political system. So we asked ourselves, what kind of political system should we have? And the debate then was that we should go back to people, the different communities governing themselves, and then forming a nation state called federalism, Majimbo. And we formed that in the Independence Constitution. But there was already an established administrative class, which then formed a national elite. Okay? And that elite was wedded to managing an administrative state. Yeah? So the battle for Kenya has always been between this original administrative class, which transformed into the national political elite, which believes it is the one which should govern the country from the center. They are the ones who are left to be governing us. And the people at the bottom who believe that we should govern ourselves and constitute a new nation. Okay? So they then disbanded the Independence Constitution and restored the administrative state. Because the one-party state was really a restoration and maintenance of the administrative state. So that is what we call a status quo. That is the establishment, the center, which believes that it is their right to govern this country from the center and to govern everybody and to whatever. The Constitution was a battle about that. And we went back and said, no, we want a nation where we govern ourselves from the bottom. And we constitute a new nation state which is equitable and all manner of things. So all these structures that we were putting in the new Constitution was to transform the state, a second attempt to transform Kenya from that administrative state to actually a political system in which the power belongs to the people, not to these national elite. So this battle we are having is about that. That is the heart of the battle. This national political elite, it's both political and administrative. You see, one of the first things they refused to do under the new Constitution was to dismantle the provincial administration, because that is their whatever. Because the county governments are really supposed to replace the provincial administration. But you see them still trying to keep the provincial administration there, which is a creature of the center. So the problems that are now emerging were bound to, is now the real battle for the soul, for the political soul of this country. Are we going to restore a administrative state, a unitary administrative state, or are we going to institutionalize a political system of governance from below? So what you're seeing is, and you've seen them clawing back power.
Yeah.
All the things he's describing is clawing back power. Now,
Is a clawback, but let me jump in there and give what is, somewhat of a popular description of governors. That a governor is like a small president. So the difference between the kind of national elite that you've spoken about and the county elite to the person who has his services delivered at that county level is minimal. There's the chase cars in terms of what you see, right? There's the chase cars, there's the references to these people with big titles, there's all of that comes with, all of that largesse that comes with the county. And I understand that might be perception. And therefore, in this debate, it's like Kamolo said, that some people perceive this as a debate between money that is being held by national government for the governors, rather than money for the people at the county
let me
level.
come to that.
Yeah.
You see, part of the thing with the administrative state, this national political class, is that it lacks political legitimacy. It's not an authentic. It's not an authentic political leadership. It's very far away from the people. It's a product of the colonial system, administration by and large, and the National Civil Service. So the way it legitimizes itself with the people is this thing called development. So the president, legitimacy derives from going around bribing people with development goodies. Yeah. So what the new constitution did and devolution did is to take that away and take it to the bottom. So the county governor is the one who's seen now as the responsible. Yeah. So what we did, having done so, is that we created a legitimacy deficit at the top. Because what does the president do? Does he sit and twiddle his thumbs?
And do policy.
And do policy. And he cannot go around telling people when he visits them, I have given you this road. Yes. I have given you this hospital. So what we saw, and where this leads to this fiscal crisis, is we saw the biggest crack of power was the borrowing binge that the national government went into. And this borrowing binge was so that the national government can do bigger projects than the counties. So as it can overwhelm the counties. So the thing you see with bad-mouthing county governments is envy by the national elite at the center. Because now for you to have political legitimacy and status and clout, you have to go there. Yeah. You have to go to Elgeyo Marakwet and live with the people. But you want to lord over the people from Nairobi, from Karen. So you want to be the lord of the Marakwet, but you live in Karen. But devolution forces you to go to the people, to Marakwet, and they see you every day. Yeah. So there's a sociology. There's also a sociological thing happening, changing the character of what it means of the elite. Yeah. Requiring, you have seen during the second election, more people choosing to go to the county assemblies. From Nairobi, even people giving up. I know there is a senator who left the Senate and became an MCA in Western Kenya. So that transformation, it is now the transformation I'm talking about. We are actually seeing the constitution transforming into a political system where the country is not run by a national elite sitting in Nairobi. And the national elite sitting in Nairobi resents that. And that is where bad-mouthing MCAs, bad-mouthing governors, because governors are now enjoying the status that before only cabinet and PSs and big people in Nairobi would enjoy. But they are earning it. Okay. They are earning it because they are down there. If they don't deliver services, they are close to the people and they are accountable to the people. Yeah, they are the result that can happen, and they can build their reputation. They can build a good reputation if you do a good job, and you can also destroy it if you do a bad job. Okay. So you can see a more organic political system evolving, and that is a huge threat to the national elite at the center.
Yeah.
It has this legitimacy deficit. So it has gone and borrowed huge amounts of money to counter that. That money has that debt has crowded out county share of revenue because the debt is now being paid the interest, and they are trying to ring fence the national budget and make the county governments actually absorb all the austerity,
All the bad manners.
all the bad manners. So that is the underlying political, economic game that is happening, and you can see. So the center is feeling the loss of power and prestige and ability to control money and to control the country, and it is trying to bring it back.
All right, Abraham, when you hear the debates, both at county level and national level, about the division of revenue bill, specifically from the National Assembly, keeping in mind what David has just said, do you see that kind of envy? How do you perceive it? Yeah.
So first of all, I think let me say two things. One, that the devolution of power that Lee and Kamodo have spoken about was a game changer, because it was not just power to walk around and be called your excellencies, but it's power with responsibility, responsibility over very tangible services. I mean, when you think about healthcare, if people don't have drugs in their dispensary, they basically march to your office, and sometimes the office is too far. They actually come to your house. So you have an incentive to make sure that service is being provided. However much you may be, I don't care, assuming a governor is a don't care. I mean, there's a level beyond which the Constitution already holds you, to account for that. If farmers don't have extension service workers or don't have seeds and the planting season is coming, you better just find it and provide it for them.
Yeah.
So that proximity of power with responsibility that you are directly accountable for is why then you see the pressure to try and actually frustrate it, because they know the services are it's water, it's about trade regulation, it's about air pollution and control. It's about the tangible, street lights, parking.
Forgive me if I'm perceiving this wrongly. But if the conversation is really about power, but power with responsibility, the way my reading of Kenyan politics is that Kenyan politicians, the political and national elite, want power without the responsibility, and that would also sort of like go down to it would seep down to the counties. So for some county officials, some county governors, wouldn't it be then easier for the national government to take some of these functions, and then you can have that power, that largesse, and then when the proverbial thing hits the fan, you just point at the national government.
And that is what the Constitution was fixing.
Yeah.
That's what basically, the point I'm trying to explain is that the intention was that for services that definitely require, a small-scale provision, a dispensary and the like, it's only education, I think, and I think you can correct me, it's only primary education that basically was exempted. And of course, that comes with many other factors. The point is that we are not saying that we did not envision a situation whereby you would create other national elite type at the county level. No, that's not the point. The point is that we are trying to make sure that by pushing this responsibility to the local level, the second thing that I want to talk about is that you also couple it with public participation, that people are actually able to come. And with a few weaknesses here and there, the fact that people are able to engage and determine what kind of services and what kind of gaps they are having is already changing things, fundamentally. We have the big cases where basically counties have taken and turning things around, the cases like Makueni, where the governor is at the forefront of making sure that counter system, that countervailing power of the people is being exercised and being exercised well. But when you go to other places, just last week I was in one of the places in Baringo, And I mean, it's far away. It's where the Ilchamus, it's Makutani ward. And I met people there, about 120 of them together with their elders. And they said, before devolution, that dispensary wasn't working. Now it's working, and we know who to go for if it does not work. And the discussion now was about water. And they were saying, if this borehole is not working in the next couple of months, we know who we are going for. You know, they will be held to pay. So that's what I'm basically. But let me come to the discussion about and the question you ask, listening to the conversation about the national government. There is something that we did starting in 2003 that seems to be coming to haunt us. Now, because of the failure of the center to provide services, you know, in the wisdom of parliamentarians and in the Kibaki, the NAC government, they established the Constituency Development Fund, CDF. Now, CDF was a stopgap measure until you have a political system that is accountable for provision of public services. And as we talk, it's still at the Supreme Court because it's a fight that has gone on to try and hold on to something that completely has served its purpose.
It's redundant.
You know, it's purely redundant. But it's tied to the heart and soul of the national government. And it's now called the National Government CDF, and is a percentage of the national government allocation. Now you see there the incentive, both political and economic, that the more you can keep the national government allocation high, the higher the amount of CDF. Coincidentally, that the figure that is being contested right now of 25 billion, the difference between 335 billion and 310 billion, is the exact amount of the increment to the CDF kitty this financial year.
Okay. And I was going to say something. And don't forget, this is a tragedy of this discussion. Between when CDF started and now, the responsibilities constitutionally of CDF have been reduced. In fact, they're almost like, because they can't do anything in health, most of their responsibilities have been taken away. But the money has continued to increase. The responsibilities of the county governments are being increased because they're getting both, legally they're getting more functions, but the expectations by the people are also higher. So their responsibilities are getting higher. Their money is being reduced effectively. That really is a tragedy.
And that's what I want to come to. Now, what is the language that Kenyans are hearing that is now confusing this debate? Because when you hear MPs like Kimani Ichung'wah or the majority leader talk about the division of revenue bill, it's really, and even the president himself, it is, you know, in part what David was talking about. We don't have money, you know. And that's a very seductive argument. Even if you were to take it back to the, you know, to your home budget. If I don't have money, I can't go and take my children somewhere. You understand? And I think very simply that's the understanding of it. So how do you break down that language and then tell people actually what they're saying is actually not true? Maybe that's okay. Yeah.
We don't have money. Where did the money go? The money went the following. We have tripled debt. Because we have tripled debt, but the debt we have borrowed is also more expensive than what we were borrowing before. So the debt service is more than triple. So if you look at the financial year just ended, revenue was 1.45 trillion, okay, tax revenue, about 1.45 trillion. Now, what do you have to spend this on? The first claim on that money is interest on debt. It's about 400 billion. Then you have other consolidated fund services, what we call non-discretionary things, pensions, all sorts of things, 100 billion. That's 500, okay? Then you have national government salaries, 450. So you are at 950. Now you are left with 450 about, and you have two things you haven't done. You haven't transferred to the counties, and they're asking for 350 billion, and you haven't done national government O&M, which in their budget is 500 billion. So you need 850, and you only have 450. So yes, but where is the money? Where did the money go? When this government came, interest on foreign debt the year before was 16 billion. Interest on foreign debt now is approaching 200 billion. Okay? So debt service has crowded out service delivery. And that problem has been posed squarely by the national government trying to do mega infrastructure projects so as to compete with the counties in terms of legitimizing itself in whatever. If you recall, I tried to really wave this flag, but people were cheering. I told them, we don't need this railway. They said, no, 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 you are anti-development. These mega projects we're doing, I said, this debt is going to crowd out. The other thing which has happened is that not only has the debt crowded out revenue, it has reduced the revenue base. Because the government has borrowed both domestically and foreign. Domestically, it crowded out the private sector. So private investment has collapsed. So the tax-paying economy is not growing. So that if you look at that revenue I'm talking about, the revenue to GDP ratio, how much you're getting out of the economy, has fallen from 18% when this government came to power. It is now 14%. Okay? So it's the lowest it's been since Moi. Now, that decline in revenue share is because the productive economy is not growing. What is growing is public spending. And we are calling that economic growth, which is wrong. So, but if you ask, if we were still collecting 18% of GDP, how much revenue would we have? We would have at least 1.7 trillion. So the economic damage that crowding out the private sector has done is worth at least 300 billion in revenue to the government. Obviously, if we had 300 billion more, we would not be having this fight, the fight over a small amount. So it is true. But the reason why we are in a revenue crisis is because we are in debt distress. But people don't want to make that connection because of their political alignment. Because the people who are trying to divert attention from debt distress are pro-Jubilee people, and especially pro the president, because he is the one who's the face of the debt, of the borrowing, of building a railway we don't need. These are his legacy projects. So people do not want to point to Uhuru's legacy projects as the cause of the crisis. And I think because he knows it, that's why he keeps throwing these tantrums and saying that we have no money. He does, but they don't want to ask you, where did the money go?
Coincidentally, the Big Four, which is his agenda, quite a bit of it actually are county government functions, right? So fine, we're in debt right now. And for the foreseeable future. How does this, no, I shouldn't ask how it affects, the counties because it's fairly obvious. Fairly obvious. But then what do the counties do? Because now we're in a political system that requires for us to fund the counties to ensure that, as we've been discussing here, power, services, are all devolved to the, So what do we do in a situation like this? Let's start with you, Kamogo. Like legally,
there are very many things that compound the situation because now, then you then go to how even the little money that we have is then allocated. If you go through the budget line by line and the allocations, you will find conservatively about 70 billion shillings that should be purely be money allocated to the counties, which the national government has no business holding. It will find in the Ministry of Agriculture. You'll find the Ministry of Water and Sanitation has adverts every day. You'll find, of tenders to do counter work, and boreholes. So even in a very difficult state, even if we just obeyed the letter of the Constitution and said the money that belongs to counties, transfer it to counties, we would not be having this problem. You see, what is happening now is that the counties are paying the price for the problems at the top. The national government is trying to ensure that it doesn't pay part of that price. Now, the problem is even more serious. The allocation is just the first step. Not only is the money to the counties reduced, the money is also not released on time. So you actually have a double problem. So the fight even for money is just one. The bigger problem now is that the money doesn't come. So what happens? Last year, I think the amount that was released by the end of the year was about 60-something%. That 60-something% is equivalent to the recurrent budget of most counties. And you see, recurrent budget is not about paying MCAs. It's actually paying doctors, buying medicine. So that's what we're talking, it's paying salaries for doctors, health workers, extension workers, ECD teachers. So it's important because people say they're spending 67% on salaries. It's not salaries for the officers. It's not true.
It's nurses.
It's nurses and everybody. So what you are then saying is that you're actually then leaving the county governments unable to do anything else other than routine services. Now, come back to what David was saying. So what it means that the space for development is then owned by the national government. And that's what the refrain is, that we have released so much money. Can you even see the evidence of anything? What are these people doing? In fact, CDF used to do better. At least you could see dispensaries. The truth of the matter is, not only have we reduced the revenue, we have also ensured we don't release the money on time. Last year, the money was released on the 29th of June, which means you can't spend it. And from where I sit, it cannot be accidental. You know, even the numbers are too good to just be accidental. So while the argument that there is no money is part of the story, the reality is that even the little that is there, we're using it badly and against the principles of the Constitution. And what that is doing is that it is giving people a dissatisfaction with their governments, which has nothing to do with those governments.
But you see, if you look at the Auditor General reports on how counties are spending their money, how they are paying for different services, then there's also evidence there that the counties themselves don't have either the ability to manage it or are deliberately mismanaging these things.
Now,
you see,
that's a conversation on mismanagement. And I think it's always important to say, I think nobody says that counties should be allowed to have wastage and, you know, and mismanagement. But let's not forget that the institutions that ensure that that doesn't happen are national institutions. So if the national government institutions have failed, you know, in ensuring that that pilferage is not happening, then that is their failure there. But even more importantly, shilling for shilling. You know, let's take the current, and I don't want to assume that the charges mean people are guilty. If you look at the charges that were done against the Treasury officials, I think the figure that's banded around 20, people say 67, whatever the figure is. If you were to assume that it's 60 billion shillings, that is actually almost equivalent to the entire development budget of all the counties combined. So if you were to look in terms of shilling for shilling, in terms of volume,
Let
me actually do the numbers for you. Since we started devolution up to last financial year, the transfers to the counties amount to 1.7 billion, 1.7 trillion. Okay? Counties can only do 30% on development projects. So if you look at 30%, if they were to do 30% of that money, and you take it in average, each county would have done at most, on average, 11 billion shillings of development expenditure. If you look at if you cumulate the national government development budget over the same period, per county, it is 70 billion shillings per county.
7 times.
7 times. So we should be seeing on the ground 7 times as many national government development projects done and completed than county ones. I would challenge you to find me a county which will tell you there is more national government development here than ours. 2, that 1.7 trillion, which is both finances recurrent and development, is less than the cumulative national government wage bill for the same period.